Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
I'm lost in the ozone here. Tim, are you there? Tim, are you out there?
It's the year 2929.
I feel lost. I can't find my way back to 2016. I don't know where I am. I just saw Christopher Columbus pass me by. Oh, boy. But I'm sure with Peter Moon and Adam Gorightly at our side right here in the time machine, we're going to be able to get back to where we belong, I think. Hello, Tim. How are you?
We're the first non-Brazilians to travel through time.
Time has always fascinated me. My friend April, every time she calls me on the telephone, she wants to know, where has the time gone? And I told her that Einstein is not around to discuss it with him, and I'm not sure that I would understand it anyway. And then I always tell her, well, see, the sun is behind the building over there, and tomorrow it will merge again. So we know that we haven't really lost time. Or maybe we have lost time. Have you lost time recently?
Have I lost time recently? Every day.
Yes, every day. Well,
but I mean, seriously, unlike some people that I have talked to, no, that has never happened to me that I can remember.
I'm wondering now, okay, so they're obviously in a lot of what we do, which we would round it up by calling it the bizarre or the paranormal. Time does seem to play a big part in our research and in our work, more so than it does to most people who are just spending an ordinary, if there is such a thing, 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have people who say that they've been abducted, that they've been taken away, and that when they return back to Earth, that instead of having been gone, like a day or two, like it may seem to them, they've only been gone maybe an hour or so, right? I mean, it's a whole thing with time distortion. Then we even have, of course, people who say that they're able to stop time. I remember Uri Geller always had this thing with watches. In fact, even Kreskin did something with me one time. I was backstage at What's My Line, a long since defunct TV show. Although I think I heard recently it was making a comeback, or maybe it made a comeback and lasted 2 weeks. I'm not sure, but he said to me when I got home that something strange would have happened, and now I should be on the he wasn't specific about it. And of course I realized, well, okay, when I got home, something strange might have happened, and any little thing that would have happened would have seemed strange, since he kind of planted that notion in my subconscious mind, right?
Yeah, that's how he did it.
Okay, well that's what I think. But anyway, my time, my watch, had either gone ahead or moved back an hour. I mean, it did. My watch was correctly set, because I would have never gotten to what's my line on time if it hadn't been properly set. But when I got back home, it was not set properly, and it was the kind of watch. The only way that you could change the time it had one of those, watch little pins in the front that you had to pull out and turn it, and so forth. And he certainly didn't do that. So there's my missing time episode.
Well, Tim, I think the only thing that would even come close for me for something like that is that I saw a guy one time walking across the parking lot, and I noticed him because he was dressed rather oddly. He was like wearing a great big, like floppy hat and brightly colored shorts and like a Hawaiian shirt. And
That
I
was
looked,
me.
yeah. Well, and then he walked across this parking lot and into a building, and I looked down at the camera I was working with, and then looked right back up again, and he was back clear across the parking lot, walking that very same route back again. It was almost like I don't know, like time had been rewound real quick, and he was reenacting that event all over again. I did find out later though that there was a gentleman who used to live in that building who had died about a year previously, who was rather eccentric and dressed in clothing like that. So I don't know if that was a ghostly event or kind of like a time slip type of event.
Well, in preparation for this show, and you know how we like to prepare, we actually do a little bit of preparation. I went, and all over YouTube are these what purport to be time travel videos of things, people coming in and out of time, or what appear to be misplaced people or misplaced um, events. And I studied some of these closely, and some of them are very interesting, and some of them are either hoaxes or not um, what they purport to be. Now, I don't know if you've seen this one, but I'm sure you probably have. And there's a video that's posted of a clip from an old Charlie Chaplin movie,
Right.
right? And there's a crowd of people, and I think, is it a zebra or something that's in front of this crowd of people, and they're all passing kind of behind and around whatever this figure is. And there's one elderly lady who is dressed in the regalia of that time period, which would be what, Tim, around 1920?
Something like that, yeah.
Give or take a few.
I mean, it was one of Chaplin's silent films. But.
Yeah. Anyway, she walks in front of the camera, and she appears, at least to some people, to be talking on a cell phone. Right? Have you seen that one, Tim?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, she appears to be talking on a cell phone, and then she just kind of walks out of frame. Now, I don't know what are your have you got any feelings on that one?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be a cell phone. There weren't any cell phone towers up at the time.
Well, that's what we would assume, except if she were a time traveler. Now, one of the things that throws that off, of course, okay, if she had a cell phone, why would she walk into frame wearing the fashion of the day? If she had popped up from, 2010 or 12 or whatever it is, you would think she would be, dressed in a mini skirt and high heels as she goes about her daily routine.
I was going to say no smart time traveler is going to go into the past and be wearing a futuristic or their it would be their present time outfit. It'd be futuristic in that time. She'd stand out like a sore thumb.
Well, yeah, but now we're assuming she didn't get there in some H.G. Wells time machine, right? I mean, this doesn't seem like that kind of, time traveler. This is like, whoops, I've been misplaced in time.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden,
no, she was definitely dressed in
oh yes,
an outfit of the time.
Yes, okay.
Her cell phone looked more like a walkie-talkie.
Well, now my opinion is, I believe that since it is kind of a business area that she seems to be walking through, that perhaps she came from the dentist office, right? And that she is holding some sort of cold compress on her on her face. That's my theory. I mean, it's as far of a gamble as anything else. Now, there's a much better one out there, more recent, looks like maybe the 1940s. Um, and this lady, a very attractive young woman, I would guess, in her late 20s or so, is amidst a crowd of people looking like perhaps they're on their lunch break or going to lunch or headed home, uh, or something of that nature. And she appears to be talking into a device, and you could actually see her flip it as if it were a flip top phone. That one I give a little bit more credibility to. Um, just my opinion, and there were a lot of others that we could discuss them on and off over the night. But I think by this time, my goodness, we've been chatting away a lot longer than we usually do, Tim. So why don't you give us tell us about who the guests are going to be tonight?
Well, of course. Well, we have Peter Moon and Adam Gorightly, and I think that we should start with Peter Moon, Tim, because he has just recently come back from what was probably a long and strenuous trip to Romania. Is that correct, Peter?
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, glad to have you back, and thank you very much for being on the show with us tonight.
It's nice to be back.
Well, and as if our audience is not familiar with Peter Moon, Peter has been involved in researching time travel and the possibility of time travel technology for a long time, and he's also known for his Montauk project books. So it's just really fantastic that you're with us again tonight, Peter. And of course we have Adam Gorightly. Adam, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, very good. Nice to be back. Tim,
well,
it just occurred to me you sound a hell of a lot like Dr. Demento. Has anybody ever told you that?
No, I don't.
Which Tim?
Tim Swartz.
Really? Well, Doctor. No, nobody has ever told me that before.
Well, you do.
Oh, well, great. I love Dr. Demento. I used to listen to him all the time.
Well, you have a second career.
There you go.
I just wanted to note these time travel photos and videos. People with cell phones. Be kind of hard to use a cell phone before there were cell phone towers.
I can take this on a very interesting thread and integrate it with Adam as well, if you allow me.
Please do, Peter. Go for it.
Yeah, these obviously you see much on the internet, and since I've been in this business, you see people grasping at straws when it comes to this subject of time travel. They're grasping at straws. The evidence is always sketchy, and So you're frustrated by people, well, either by the vagary of what's being presented or people trying to appear to be something that they're not. A lot of wannabeism. What I have now, this is again obscure, but there do appear to be people who really have traveled in time, and of course, Preston Nichols would be no exception. Except that there is so much, I guess what you'd say, debris that comes with the experiences that it causes people to reject much of his persona and accompanying information. Dr. David Anderson, on the other hand, he's very mysterious. I've recently posted these or put up these videos, timetraveleducationcenter.com. Anybody can go see the math and physics of time travel, the science of it. So that mystery has been dispelled. I mean, it is an actual scientific thing. But when we're talking about grasping at straws, and let me just tell you mine. I've been doing this for since 1990. I've been investigating this. This is 26 years, and it's taken this long to be able to get the science of it in an explainable way to where an 8th grader can understand it. He might have to go through it a few times, or an adult might have to go through the material a few times, but it's very understandable. The point of it is there appears to be a plethora of people who have had experience with time travel. Now, this might be subjective. The best you can come up with proof is subjectivity. But I was on a very, I guess what you'd say, hard course with Andrew Barthes. Andrew Barthes is I don't know what he prefers to call himself, perhaps a shaman, but he's been dealing with time travel phenomena and time traveler types for a long time. And I was doing we did a webcast with him, myself and himself and Douglas Dietrich and Laura Lee Solomon. And we were in the process of doing a whole course. It was like a 10-hour course on the subject of time travel. And what this was leading into was the subject of time travelers, actual time travelers. Now, I did meet one, and he seemed very authentic, but his view was very limited. It was very limited in terms of his experience in traveling in time. And he was deferring to me as more of an expert, whereas I don't claim to have traveled in time at all. So it was kind of a unique situation. But anyway, what I'm alluding to here, or what I'm getting at, is that this whole endeavor I was doing with Andrew Barthes and Douglas Dietrich and Laura Lee Solomon, it was kind of like cut across by this current of what I would call Satanism, a negative current. Now, this not only kind of alludes to the black helicopter phenomena of the 90s, but Adam Gorightly has written on this subject. And this is a great way to integrate him into the conversation of time travel. I don't really know, Adam, what your expertise on time travel is, but you do have some experience chronicling certain dark corners of history. And I'd just like to know if you have anything to say about that, because I found that there's a direct current. I could even go into it a little deeper if need be, but do you have anything to say, Adam?
About Satanism and time travel?
Yep.
Really, I'd like to hear what you had to say. No, I don't have anything off the top of my head. Okay.
Well, in particular, Douglas Dietrich, who you may be familiar with, he's the most popular host on Revolution Radio, and he came into my life a few years ago because I was studying Mae Brussel, and Mae Brussel was, the mother, and you know her well, I know, Adam.
Of course, yeah.
The mother of conspiracy on the JFK subject, and she, tied the JFK into the Nazis and stuff. And of course, there were Nazis at Montauk and whatnot, and they've got their own supposed connections to time travel. But Douglas Dietrich, the Mae Brussel's life ceased when she began to investigate the Presidio sex abuse scandals. And these all were pointing in the direction of Michael Aquino, who she was attempting to investigate, and then right after that, she just died. Now, it doesn't mean that he killed her. He was not found guilty of the scandals at the Presidio, but certainly the military refused to investigate him. So it doesn't mean he wasn't guilty. It doesn't mean he was guilty. It just means that they refused to investigate him. Now, Douglas Dietrich was assigned, he was being groomed to be his top lieutenant. And was to a certain extent because he used to burn documents at the Presidio. He worked for the Department of Defense as a research librarian. He was burning stuff on Roswell. He was burning stuff on Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard and a host of other subjects that ranged from all sorts of, and he would keep notes and whatnot, and he's been very prolific in talking about these things. But the Aquino, of course, is of great interest in regards to, say, the Montauk Project, because he was working on what was called the Phoenix Project back in Vietnam, which was all about manipulating things through sound. So he was operating this It's called the Montauk Project was called the Phoenix Project. There were different installments of it. Phoenix 1, 2, 3. He was working at the beginning in, I think, as early as 1968, if I'm not mistaken, in Vietnam, where they were using sound and actual grammaton or grammar to influence events. And he would have his covens meet at the Presidio, and he couldn't take the grammar or the grammaton that he was getting. He was borrowing it from libraries, because he could do through the library borrow system, but he couldn't take it out of the library. So he'd do it downstairs while Dietrich was burning documents, because he could only burn documents at night because it was so hot in the day. So he would be subject to being privy to what was going on. So there was a whole relationship between those two, which was finally severed. And this has been, and so of course I was doing X amount of dialogue with him about this and then all of a sudden it just cut across like a current, and it stopped, and we've not been able to be on that train of investigating time. Now, Andrew Bartzies works with time cult and the fallout from the time cult in a place called Damanhur in northwest Italy. Damanhur is a whole sort of incredible, elaborate temple with all just incredible architecture and art, and you can look it up online. But this is sort of where time travel is a part of our consciousness, or time is a part of our consciousness, and we're sort of on the, we're like, in the hull of a boat, and we can't get up and look and see that there's above decks, and we can't see that it has sails, and we don't really see the ocean, if there's other ships, and there's a planet. This is kind of how we view time as a species.
All right. Let's go to our break now, Tim.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, we are indeed the internationally famous Tim Beckley and Tim Schwartz. And we only have on globally famous guests. And some perhaps not so famous, but we want to learn and learn and learn. And that's why we're here once a week, to dabble into the greatest mysteries of all, pardon the expression, time. But we left Peter Moon back there dangling on the outskirts of time travel. So we want to go back to our conversation. Let's turn back the time machine. And Peter, you were saying?
Yes. Well, basically, I was talking about time being sort of like, we perceive time as if we were in the hull of a ship. And we're not aware of what's above deck, the mast, the wind. And yes, this is kind of where we perceive ourselves as a species. We're very limited in our perception of time. So when these things come out of the ecosphere and they affect us, whether somebody has missing time or whatever they experience, these things do happen. They're being taken out of the environment that they're normally in, and they're being subjected to another environment. And of course, our perception is all sort of minimized or controlled. So it's like, time is really all about our perception, the limitations on our perception, the way our food supply is polluted, the way so many things are obstacles to actually evolving or expanding. And this all, the religions of the world have, particularly the Eastern religions, have tried to chronicle this and categorize it. And it all comes back to this sort of negative element that's, that we're assaulted with. And I also want to explain that there's a danger in the way you deal with this information, because I was offered a very intriguing offer to write all this stuff about the Son of Sam, because I know a guy who was involved, not with the Son of Sam murders, but he was there in Berkowitz's apartment when Berkowitz was arrested, and he was a victim of that cult, and he was like ready to open up all the corridors and tell me all this stuff. And I wanted him to write the book, because if I were to go down and get involved in all that stuff, I'd be basically chasing Satan's tail. And I would have prevented me from doing all of the research I've done in the last year, particularly the Time Travel Explained series of videos, which never would have gotten done, because I would have been chasing Satan's tail, and basically it's going to take you into places where it's not going to serve you. So you have to be very careful about how you approach the subject, because it can be very distracting, and you can, get on crusades to where, when you end up fighting the devil, you can end up becoming the devil, so to speak. So that's a warning I would say to anybody. But this is kind of what one is dealing with when one reaches the limits of one's perception. Too much creepy information can beget a creepy life.
Well, Peter, let's bring Adam back into the conversation again. And Adam, we brought you onto the show because you've had a fascination with time travel. I mean, is this? Is this like me? I mean, where you've just ever since you were a kid and just saw the TV shows and the movies or things like that? Or I mean, have you had or have known anybody who's had actual like unusual experiences?
Well, yeah, I've had a fascination with all things weird, high strangeness. But just to touch on what Peter was talking about, maybe in a little different vein, it's time is so tied into our perception, and mental states. And I think about, I've been a time traveler in the sense, and we've all probably done this, where we're, for instance, driving somewhere and we zone out, and go into some level of a trance state, and all of a sudden, well, I drove through Bakersfield and I didn't even notice it, So that's, that could be akin to time travel.
Well, that's possible. I don't know if that's a sign of true time travel, Bakersfield.
Well, it's sort of like the whole missing time question, but when you're younger, growing up, it's like, oh God, when is summer vacation gonna come? It seems like it's eons, and when am I gonna be 18? And then as you get older, the perception.
When am I gonna get my?
The perception certainly changes, where the years just go flashing by. So a lot of it is tied into our perception. You mentioned the stuff about missing time, and also, Peter was talking about technology. I just wanted to touch on. It is interesting that Michael Aquino, who has these connections to the occult, was indeed pretty high level in the military, working on non-lethal technologies with the like of John Alexander, and that kind of ties into a lot of the involvement with the military and secret crafts and UFOs, but. I'm kind of jumping all over the place. I saw Stuart Swerdlow, who has, I believe, written a book or two or been the subject of
well, I think Peter's published them.
Right, correct. And there was an episode, and it was kind of laughable, of Jesse Ventura a few years ago. He was doing on time travel, and one of the guests was Stuart Swerdlow, who explained to Jesse that he could travel in time, and he started, the way I'm going to do it is to first go into a mental state. And of course, Jesse Ventura was having none of that. He was trying to call him a hoaxer or full of crap. But, it's deeply tied into our perceptions, the whole issue of time itself,
Well, I think one of the things that I find interesting about what Peter was saying in the first segment of the show is that there seems to be, because most people, when they think of time travel, they think of, like, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, or the inventor builds the DeLorean and has to use, like, a mechanical device, and there seems to be a connection. Maybe not all the way through, but there seems to be a connection with time travel and the occult, and I'll use the occult for want of a better word. Perhaps you guys can come up with something better.
It's the hidden knowledge. It's the occult, and time travel. There was this guy, Madman Markham. Did you hear him on Art Bell over the years?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So he was trying to create a time travel machine or something that would transport matter. And he was a colorful character. Apparently, he did at some point later on travel, and it was set up. He had the bunch of transformers he rigged up into like a Tesla coil to transport him, and when he did finally step into the electrical field, the next thing he knew, he woke up, and it was, according to his story, who knows, but it was 5 months later, and he was 30 miles away. So simple time travel might just be on a very basic level, transporting matter a short distance.
Well, we have actually, Tim, we have actually published more books on time travel than anyone else that I know of. We've got Maria DeAndrea just did a book on time travel waves, right? And
That's
there's
right.
the Commander X's time travel fact or fiction, and time travel how to do it. And then our most popular would have to be time travel machines and how to construct them, which I have to admit, I sometimes look at these diagrams and I don't know which way to turn the page.
Now, of course, it gets a little different. This Madman Markham guy is basically transporting matter, and so you're going into the future. The idea of traveling into the past, that's a little more iffy. And he brought up the fellow Andrew Basaggio. Is that how you say his name?
I think that's how I would say.
It's hard to know how to process.
Basaggio, as in Chicago.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Good.
Well, I don't know. Now you say it seems to be a little bit more difficult to travel into the past, but that seems to be from our way of deciphering time travel. Because certainly, if there are time travelers coming here, like we were just discussing before we came on the air, the Rendlesham Forest incident, where at least one of the witnesses believes that it was a time travel device, Jim Pennington, right? And he thinks that they actually tried to communicate with him or put something into his mind. So those are time travelers from the future coming back into the past. But now,
any type of SpaceX.
Okay, would it have to be that you can travel back before the first time travel incident took place?
No, that's not correct. Technically, you can, and these are explained in my video, the science of it, and it's all the science. What I've taken, based upon the work of Dr. David Anderson, is all of this stuff is in physics books. It's in these videos.
Well, tell us about Dr. Anderson. I mean, most of our listeners are not familiar with him. He is living in Romania. Is that correct?
No. He spends most of his time in the Southwest currently.
Oh, okay.
He's spent a lot of time in India recently, where they have the most advanced time travel labs or the most largest. I don't know the most advanced, the most largest time travel labs in the world. And anyway, Dr. Anderson is somebody I met in 1999. He was a subscriber to my newsletter. He had a time travel research center on Long Island in Hauppauge, and he just kind of appeared mysteriously, and he became my friend, and he eventually sponsored my first trip to Romania, and which he funds the World Genesis Foundation, which is a charitable organization, which he kind of suggested and made me a board member of. And this is an adventure I do in Romania once a year. He has not been in Romania, at least at this camp, since 2009. I last saw him in 2010 at Montauk, where he did a lecture to about 20 of us and showed his time reactor, which could speed up the growth of a plant that would take 4 days to grow. He could do it in 3 or 4 minutes. He showed a video of this. But so time can be slowed down and speeded up. And it's these 7 series of videos. Time Travel Theory Explained. You can go to timetraveleducationcenter.com and watch these things for free. But basically taking the existing extant theorems and whatnot of mathematics and physics and just demonstrating how it does not violate the laws of math or physics. So it's to answer your original question, Tim, is when you have a self-contained field and you slow it down or speed it up, either or. Sort of like in the Philadelphia experiment where they created this bubble, this electromagnetic bubble. All of this technology in the Philadelphia experiment bubble becomes very viewable and seeable and understandable in the context of Dr. Anderson's work, which you can also look at if you can brave the more obtuse references to science that he puts on there. I make them much more understandable in the AndersonInstitute.com. You can look at them there too, and you might be able to understand them if you have a good grasp of physics and math. But basically, when you slow down a self-contained field, you slow it down, it's going to go into the future. If you speed it up, it's going to go into the past. And what it's actually doing is veering off a timeline. If you can imagine an XY grid, and the line, the vertical line is sort of the forward timeline, this self-contained bubble or field is going to go off of the line, and if it's sped up, it's going to spin off and go into the past. And the reason it can go beyond the origin of the time machine is something in physics. They established these reference points called light cones. And a light cone is an arbitrary designation, but basically just they're like pixels in space that physicists will use to designate space, because space doesn't have pixels. But to use it computationally, they make up these pixels, they call them light cones, and these light cones can be tipped. They can be tipped. This was proven in a paper in the 1970s by a man named Frank Tipler, and it set the physics world, sort of upside down, because they realized that you could actually bend light cones, which is basically bending space and time. And the reason it didn't work in a practical function, because it took too much power. Well, that has since been overcome, the power restrictions, but because there was another way to go about it. But so time and space can be turned, but when it turned, it is like a bubble just spinning off. And when you slow it down, it's like a bubble spinning off, but it's going forward. And so there is no limit to where you can go back or forth. The question becomes security and access. And in reference to, we were talking about the occult, when I began to investigate the Montauk Project, and I did a whole book dedicated to occult synchronicities, when I tried to prove it, I didn't come up with a data trail. I came up with 666 references, Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, and all the like of all these like occult figures. So I had to study the occult, and that is a whole part of and coincidences with the occult. So that's what I met up with. Now, what's very interesting about Dr. Anderson, who has said that his laboratory, the time travel, or the Anderson Institute, is in a northwest corner of New Mexico. He said this publicly, so it's not like a secret. And basically, if you look in the northwest corner of New Mexico, you will see the Four Corners. But if you want to find any sort of modicum of a town, there's a place called Shiprock. And if you wanted to drive from Shiprock down to Chaco Canyon, and Chaco Canyon is of course loaded with a lot of mysteries, you know what highway that is? That's 666 highway. I just noticed it, 666 highway. And it suggests to us that the, whatever you want to call it, the forces of darkness are inhibiting our perception of time. I mean, you can go into the whole psychedelic conspiracy as well. And I know Adam's done some work writing about Timothy Leary and whatnot and this sort of thing. But yes, the perceptions of. So I hope I answered your question, Tim.
Yeah, okay. Hey, Adam. So now let's get down to basics from your point of view here. What's your thoughts on time travel? I mean, is it possible?
Generally, I'm pretty skeptical that there's any evidence. I mean, Peter's going into some stuff here that I wasn't real knowledgeable about, so I haven't reviewed any of the material that he's presenting tonight, and that sounds pretty fascinating, So to answer your question, I remain somewhat skeptical of any genuine cases. One thing Peter brought up, and I wanted to ask him a little bit about that, and for instance, Preston Nichols, he's a purported time traveler who's part of the Montauk project. A lot of times, and Peter used the word skewed, they come back and part of the past or present, whatever, it's a little different. It's skewed. It's like we're looking at possible different realities, multiple realities. When you go to the past and come forward, things get skewed. There's a lot of talk recently about this thing called the Mandela effect. You guys have probably heard about that. It started with people start remembering different things about the past that they didn't remember Nelson Mandela dying when he did. I think that's how it started. Recently, there was one about people are remembering there were 4 passengers in the Lincoln town car that JFK was assassinated in. When you look at the photos now, there was 6 people. So there seems to be this skewing effect that goes on with the stories of time travelers. And I just wanted to ask Peter, is that what he was referring to when he used the word?
JFK had a twin brother. Don't you remember the twin brother? This is kind of what it kind of insults your intelligence sometimes. These reports of the Mandela effect, and some of the videos done on them are just deliberate frauds.
Sure, yeah.
Now, but what I would say about the Mandela effect, and this fits into everything we were saying, is that there was a pretty famous guy, Count Alfred Korzybski. He wrote a book called General Semantics, and he's going into some of the foundations of course, how people think and what's wrong with people. And he talks about, this is during the time of Freud and whatnot. And Korzybski was an inspiration for some of the work of L. Ron Hubbard, some of the psychological work. But what he says is that psychosis is an inability to properly identify space-time. So when you have these people thinking that the Bible really said this when it said this, or it's changed, is that they're misidentifying space-time, and they're fusing together 2 different memories or 2 different identifications. And this is the word confuse. Fuse, to fuse together. Con is like with, to fuse together. They're fusing 2 elements together. So they're misidentifying space-time, and basically it's a polite way of saying that they're crazy, or they're not able to identify it properly, or they're saying this changed. Now this is indicating a mental instability, or that the person's mind can't think, with the idea that Nelson Mandela died in April, but we really know he died in March. Where is the failure? Is the failure in the memory, or has somebody superimposed a new set of circumstances on you? And this is, of course, what you'll find in a nut house, whereas people will, they'll misidentify themselves with a character in space-time, or misidentify this. And of course, I've seen you know, you have to allow some tolerance to be able to say, well, there's phenomena going on here. But I've not been convinced. I do believe the Mandela effect is an effort to describe something that does happen to people who, because I know of at least one time traveler. It's the only person I've ever seen kind of move in time. And she will tell me that she will suffer psychologically, like she'll be sitting there and she'll see like 4 or 5 multiple eventualities. And she suffers with this. It's not a pleasant thing for her. So I do believe that she has perception outside of the timeline. But the problem is I use the word skewed. Yes, people come back and their psychology is skewed. They're affected. So there is a relationship. I'm not saying that everybody who's had the Mandela effect is crazy, but it's an element of craziness because you can't assign what happened. But there is a deep relationship between psychology and, what you call what's dysfunctional psychological states and time. So this is something.
I hear the sound of the faraway distant storm getting closer, and we're going to be coming up on a break in just a moment or two, and then we will be back with another fascinating conversation on time travel. And here comes Back to the Future now.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, geez. You know, that bolt of lightning there, Tim, that propelled me 5 years into the future.
And what do you see?
Sex bots from China.
It's inevitable. It's inevitable, you know it.
I swear. You know what I want to talk about? Nazi UFO time travelers. And why do I want to talk about that? Because, first of all, it's the title of a book that Tim and I just worked on. And also, the Nazis always seem to rear their head when it comes to talk of time travel. Now, I know you've written, Peter, give us the titles of some of your books. Not that I'm sure most of our listeners probably have a whole bookshelf devoted to the books of Sky Books, which is your publishing.
The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, is the most noted one. Montauk Revisited, Adventures in Synchronicity, Pyramids of Montauk, Explorations in Consciousness, and The Black Sun, Montauk's Nazi-Tibetan Connection. Of course, that one goes into the Nazi connection to Montauk. There's also the Transylvania series, starting with the Transylvania Sunrise and Transylvania.
Well, how many books now?
I've published about 21 books. I'm an author, a co-author on about 16 of them.
This actually makes you more successful than most Madison Avenue publishers have been in the last 12 years. Or 15 years.
We both know, Tim, what's happened to the publishing.
Yeah. Well, we've been able to hold on, not only because we've found a niche that people are interested in that the major publishers won't cover because they don't know how to handle it. I mean, if they thought they could make money on it, well, of course they would jump right into the fry immediately. But it's something that totally perplexes and bewilders them. Although there is a fellow, I believe his name is Horowitz, at the Penguin Books, who's written about like Occult in America and all, and he actually seems to be one of the few editors of a major publishing company that has some grasp on this. Well, I'm not talking about like Adam Parfrey or something who's kind of in the same category as we are, putting out niche books for niche niche books for niche people, Adam. That's why I would call it.
Well, yes, there is, and there's also an effort because I mean the mainstream, they've just done a whole new Netflix series on based upon the Montauk Project, and I just was they changed the name. I had notified them by certified letter, and that appears that they're violating the copyright left, right, and center. These topics are, but they also dilute it and they throw away the baby.
Now is that on already?
I believe so. I mean, they're writing it up on the internet. I get notified of it, so I have to compose a legal letter for them, another one. But to sort this thing out and look, because I haven't seen the actual footage. I've just seen what they've written about it, and they're obviously using it as an inspiration, according to the authors. So but anyway, there's definitely they could. Simon and Schuster one time contacted me. They wanted to see these books. I sent them the books. They were all excited because they're publishing Carlos Castaneda, which they know is bullshit. I mean, this is not true stuff.
Well, he never. In fact, I knew his ex-wife. She used to work at a TV station, and she said, he never left his chair in the library.
Well, I mean, but in any case, they took these and they wouldn't touch them with a hot potato because just like with your stuff, they're not psychologically capable of coming out of the denial that goes with this subject, and so it's just part of the psychology of space-time is what I would call it. But in any case, this is what makes us who we are. We're different. So
indeed, and
this is good.
And we're here to stay. I mean, I've been doing this since 1965 when I had my little mimeograph machine and got ink all over the place, and my mother vanquished me to the back porch. And believe me, when you had to put a book out in a newsletter or a book out in January, you could get frostbite. I swear, that's how bad it was. But let's get to the Nazi connection, because that seems to fascinate a heck of a lot of people. Like I say, Tim and I did a book that we worked on with Sean Castile and some of our other authors. It's the Nazi UFO time travelers, and this is something I actually wrote about back in the 1960s. I think I was one of the first Americans who actually even talked about how there might be a UFO Nazi connection. And of course, people, I wouldn't say ridiculed me because of that, because they just, most people weren't even aware of kind of what my thinking was on that. But of course, today, if you try to relate UFOs and the Nazi time travel and Roswell, which I think there's a great connection there, everything is thrown at you except the kitchen sink. But you've written about the Nazi UFO connection. What is that all about in your own words?
Well, the first thing I heard about Nazis when I first heard about Preston Nichols and Al Bielek talking about the Montauk Project was all the Nazis out there. And this, of course, was fascinating. And I did not know it at the time, but Long Island was the highest concentration of Nazis outside of Germany. And they were all out at Yaphank, which is where Brookhaven Labs became. So you can sort of see the
That's weird. Yeah.
The Nazi contingency kind of morphed into Brookhaven Labs. There was German Gardens. I began to investigate German Gardens in Camp Siegfried. When I began to investigate, take pictures, they removed the Camp Siegfried sign for years. I don't know if they finally put it back, but they didn't like me investigating out there and showing the connections. They had Adolf Hitler Boulevard, Goebbels Street, and they changed all this historically, or they changed the names of the street, but they also tried to change the historical fact that they ever were named after Goebbels and Goring and all these Nazis.
Now, do you have like earlier maps to prove that?
Oh, that's Suffolk County records. But see, there's been a movement to try and remove that history from Suffolk County. But
Wow.
they can't do it. They won't erase the history because
that's a major news story.
Well, It's been a news story. It's been in the Long Island Newsday.
Well, but doesn't. I mean, it deserves a little bit more, publicity
Sure.
than that.
Adolf Hitler has relatives. His nephews. In fact, Adolf Hitler's nephew went to Brookhaven Labs and was like doing blood analysis there. And I forget his name. He was Willie Hitler. You can even look up Willie Hitler and find that on YouTube. There was a newsreel on Willie Hitler defecting to the United States. But he worked at Brookhaven Labs, and he has a whole set of kids that are now, they're landscapers. There was an article on them, but they don't, their name would be Hitler, but they don't call themselves Hitler because it's too much of a problem.
I would guess, yeah.
So the German connection to Long Island is incredibly, incredibly strong, just from that one step alone. But
now, did you know that, Adam?
No, that's news to me. Saying for instance, the streets were named after Goebbels and
yes.
Hitler.
Yes.
Was this pre-World War II with the silver shirts and that whole movement in the U.S.?
Yeah, it was pre-World War II, and then the property that belonged to the Bund was confiscated by the alien property custodian, whose name just happened to be Leo Crowley, which was really, and I wrote about that in the book. It's kind of funny, the alien property custodian.
Yeah, yes. Okay, I remember about reading some of this now. It was in which Montauk book?
Black Sun, Montauk.
Yeah, right. Very good book.
And of course, at that time, I was prior to that book I had a German publisher who published the Montauk Project book in German, Jan van Helsing, who had written a book and that was very popular, Secret Societies in the 20th Century. He was basically arrested for writing that book because it was anti-Semitic, and you don't have freedom of speech in Germany. So he was arrested, and he would have spent time in jail, except he got off on a technicality. And anyway, he had sent me pictures of some of the early Nazi UFOs, which he had gotten from
That's Hitler's son right now.
Yeah. Hitler. He had gotten these pictures from the Knights Templar when East Germany, when the Berlin Wall fell, and there were Templars that came out of the woodwork and had contacted him, and he had information. He said that they told him they knew about experiments at Montauk. He didn't necessarily go into the time travel, but one of the most, and I'm trying to look it up as we speak, I haven't been able to find it, but one of the most interesting threads as far as Nazis and time travel comes from Douglas Dietrich, and there was a man who actually discovered black holes, and he was rejected by England. He was part Hindu. They referred to him, I believe the word they used was nigger. And the English rejected him, the head of physics there, and he went and worked with the Nazis, and he gave them the information on black holes, and they were using it they had earlier computers than even we did in the United States. So they were playing with black holes and computers way back in the 30s. The Nazis were. And if you you can listen to Douglas Dietrich's YouTube about Operation High Jump. Roswell and Operation High Jump, he goes into that specific side of it. So the time travel thread, of course, there were Nazis at Montauk, and they were generating so much of the science. There is also Stuart Swerdlow's comment in his book about the Nazis and also with Phil Schneider, with the Nazis and the USS Eldridge. There was a association between the German technology and the Americans were sort of working on that together. Duncan Cameron's father was known to smuggle Nazis into the United States via sailboats. He was known as Duncan Arnold in Germany. This is Duncan Cameron's father. So this is like a cooperation, and of course it manifests through the Montauk Project, which there was a huge German connection at Montauk.
Well, while Tim and I were doing research on our Nazi UFO time travel book. One of the things that fascinated me was, of course, the early contactee reports. Most of them took place around the Southwest California and Arizona, which, of course, under Project Paperclip, that's where a lot of the German scientists and engineers were brought over, and they started working on their space programs. And two of the leading proponents of the interplanetary theory were Hermann Oberth and Werner von Braun. And there's always been this underlying thread in ufology that you should not, or at least what the government tries to implant in the public's minds, is that you're foolish to believe in UFOs, but if you have to believe in UFOs, then you should believe that that they are all extraterrestrial interplanetary craft, and it has nothing to do with our earthly environment or any of the scientific projects that might have been going on here. But isn't it a strange coincidence that Roswell happened within a few scant miles of where these German scientists called their own headquarters? Also, in a lot, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, guys, but in a lot of the early UFO contact cases, the the UFO occupants that are very decisively Nordic looking. In fact, that's what they're called today, are Nordic or alien Aryan type aliens, spoke with a German accent. There are quite a number of actual cases that you can look up. One is Reinhold Schmidt, who was a German grain buyer who was driving through Nebraska, and he had an encounter and went on board a ship and so forth. And also, even in the very controversial George Adamski um, incident, back in the early 1950s, where he supposedly met the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Orthon Venusian. Well, most people don't realize this, but he was led to the site of the purported UFO contact through a Ouija board experiment that was contacted by an associate of his, George Hunt Williamson. Well, it turns out that George Hunt Williamson had worked for this fellow by the name of Pelly, who was actually even spent some time in jail because of his Nazi leanings during the war, and channeled information, I guess, from uh, spirits who were very pro Hitler. And after the Adamski's reported contact with Orthon in the desert, George Hunt Williamson just happened to have some plaster of Paris with him. Why he was carrying that, it's not quite been explained, but he managed to take an imprint of the boot or the shoe or whatever it was that Orthon was wearing. And if you look at the impression that the boot made in the soil, it has two swastikas in it. Now, I realize that people do connect the origins of the swastika going back to India as being a power sign. But why would Orthon be walking around with a swastika carved into the bottom of his boot that would leave a secret message in the sand, and a plaster of Paris was made of it? Now, the Adamski followers, of course, don't want to hear about this because Adamski pushed off all of his experiences as being super physical in nature, and that he actually went for trips into outer space and all, which seems a little bit on the preposterous side, unless they were perhaps conducted through experiments with astral travel and what have you. But there's always been this underlying, well, even Barney Hill, when he was looking through the binoculars and first saw the alien through the window, what did he describe him as? As being very Nazi looking. standing there glaring back at him. So there has been this underlying thread of Nazi Nazis in ufology going way, way back, but nobody wants to consider it because starting in the early 1950s, it was Major Kehoe with his government ties and his government friends who pushed the extraterrestrial theory, the ETH as it's known. And that ETH theory is still the one that's being pushed today, even though, I'm of the belief that, yes, there could be interplanetary guys and girls coming here, but why do they look so human? Why do they look so Nordic in appearance? The UFO mystery is indeed a mystery, and it encompasses many, many different avenues, you see. But to say that it's all extraterrestrial and that these are beings coming here, it doesn't fit the bill. It just does not explain a very small percentage of the UFO mystery, if anything at all.
Hey, Tim, you mentioned William Dudley Paley, who was...
That's correct.
He was an associate of George Hunt Williamson.
Uh-huh.
And actually, Williamson wrote for one of Paley's magazines.
Yeah, Valor.
Valor. And Paley was a white nationalist and actually started the Silver Shirts group, pre-World War II that were... basically,
I think some of those guys may be coming out of retirement now.
Yeah, basically fascist groups supportive of Hitler. And interestingly, I researched contactees quite a bit, and Paley himself could be considered an early contactee.
Yes.
He wrote a book in the 30s, which a lot of people point to as one of the first contactee books, where he received messages from the Sirius star system, which seems to pop up now and again in a lot of UFO stories. And you also mentioned the swastika. I think Peter can talk more about that. It's pretty prevalent in, I went to Tibet several years ago, and you'll see it in a lot of the temples and whatnot. So a lot of times it's a reversed swastika, but as I recall, Peter addressed it in his book, The Black Sun, perhaps.
Peter, what is the history in a nutshell about the swastika and its possible UFO connection?
Well, the swastika, what I wrote in The Black Sun, of course, it is an ancient symbol of Tibet, and the whirling. The whirling actually, and I show a sample of it in these videos, it's the whole idea of whirling, or time is all based upon rotation. So the swastika would be part and parcel of any form of time travel, because that's what rotation is, or the great wheel, the wheel of samsara, or whatever you want to call the great wheel of time. But what I found out about the swastika in Romania is that you go back, is the symbol of the age of Gemini. And this was their patron god Zalmoxes. Now, if you go back into the age of, what do we have? Pisces, then you go earlier to the Aries, which is the lamb and the Jews and all that. And you go earlier to Taurus, you've got the Minotaur and the bull. Well, before Taurus is Gemini. And this was the age of the swastika, the Gemini. And this is, because if you look at the swastika, it's like two twos. It represents the twins. These were Apollo and Diana. And if you study Greek mythology, you'll see that Apollo and Diana were Hyperboreans. And what does Hyperborea mean to the Greeks? It referred to anything above the Danube. And in particular, what's above the Danube, Romania, but even more so, what's above the Carpathians, Transylvania. And so this is the area that I've been going to and researching. So the Zalmoxes is this godlike character who was a human that was initiated in a cave and transformed into a god. This is their tradition, their patron god Zalmoxes. It's where we get the word Moxie in Yiddish, or Moxes is Moses. It's the same thing. By tradition, he taught the Egyptians, he taught the Persians, the Zoroastrian religion, he taught the Egyptians, the Christians,
Peter, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we are out of time for this segment. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Peter Moon and Adam Gorightly right here on Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Oh my goodness! There goes that lightning. Lightning strikes again. Wasn't that the Chris Christie song or somebody Christie? I can't remember.
Lou Christie.
Lou Christie.
Lou Christie. There you go. That's right.
There you go. I before I turn this over, because I know Tim has quite a few questions to ask our guests, Peter Moon and Adam Gorightly. But I have a question from my associate Carol Ann, who is a big fan of Peter Moon and the Montauk books. She wants to know, how can she find Ong's Hat Tavern?
Ong's Hat Tavern?
Is it tavern that you talk about in the book?
Well, if you go, there's an Ong's Hat Road in New Jersey. You can look that up on the map. Ong's Hat Road, and at the very top, I guess it would be the northmost part of Ong's Hat Road, there's a little triangle of roads, and there was a tavern there. Last time I was there years ago, it was closed. And then if you are coming from the south and you turn right, there's it was called the Anacapa Diner. That was sort of where, that's very close to where by the Ong's Hat cult was. If you go on Ong's Hat Road, if you're coming from the north and you start at the inception of the road and you take your first left down a dirt road, you can go down maybe a half a mile or a mile.
Now what town would this be? In the Pine Barrens, right?
It's in the Pine Barrens, and it was called Ong's Hat Rod and Gun Club at one point, and this is where the physicists from Princeton used to go. And then it became a sort of an ashram cult in the 70s, where time travel, or I think they called it interdimensional travel, used to occur with the help of pharmaceuticals and
I like the sound of that. Don't you, Adam?
Mm-hmm.
This was a very, very unusual, and from what I understand of that cult, there were 3 levels to it, and the most inner cult were indeed time travelers. If this is true, from what information I've been given, I dealt more with the intermediaries. But yeah, that is one example of what you might call a time cult. But if that answers your question, you can find it on the map and then you explore. That's what I did down there. And you really don't find too much physical stuff. But it's an interesting place to explore.
Well, we'll bring our own 6-pack then.
Well, it's almost like that there are secret societies throughout the planet that may be, I don't know, secret time travelers possibly.
Well, there are secret societies. Obviously, we know this, but you get into the more rarefied regions, like say in Tibet. Tibet has all been secret, and I actually met somebody who was initiated in the Bonpo tradition, and this is just in my recent trip to Romania. He was a master, and he wasn't Tibetan. I think he was Moldavian, maybe Russian, maybe Romanian. He spoke Russian and Romanian, but the Romanians criticized the accent on his Romanian. But he basically, after he talked to me, and he did not say this, he talked about how the Russian hierarchy, there was a whole Russian hierarchy of how their society was set up that was influenced by Nicholas Roerich, who went to Tibet. But I got the impression when he was talking to me that all the governments of the world have tentacles tied to Tibet. But it's sort of like on a very esoteric level. So I think Tibet
in some way, shape, or form has its tentacles into the major governments of the world, just by the very strange, unusual nature. And it's an intriguing, it would be an intriguing way to approach an existential view of the world.
Well, now, Peter, what about the location in Romania that you say is the only known location of a time reactor discharge on Earth? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, this is David Anderson's comment because of the minerals that were found in that cave that have been listed by science. And he said the only way to explain those minerals are the high heat that would have occurred to create them would be a time reactor discharge. This cave is full of bat guano, and scientists have faultily explained that it was combustion of bat guano which would have caused them to form, but this is not really a real truth. Mm-hmm. And so basically, I had been in that cave 2 years ago, and when he said this on the podcast that he did with me, he surprised me, and I surprised him by telling him I'd been to that cave, and I went back to that cave this month to investigate it. And all I really found in the cave was I went a little higher, and I found with the people I was with 3 other openings to the cave, 2 of which were human-sized, and they were both shut. One was shut with rocks from the inside, and the other was shut with a steel door. And the ostensible reason for shutting it was to keep people from getting the bat guano, which is very valuable as a fertilizer for marijuana, amongst other crops, and it's also valuable for explosives. And this is why the road to that cave was built by the dictator Ceausescu. So yes, this was an interesting area to investigate. And then at the same time I was there, the American NATO troops were in the area. I have no explanation for why. At the same time, except that it's a very sensitive area, as is described in the book, The Secret Parchment. This is like a focal point of entry point of time into our planet, according to that book. But there was also the president of Turkey allying himself with Putin. And if Turkey withdraws from NATO, as he was threatening to do, it would make Romania surrounded by hostile or non-aligned countries that aren't aligned with NATO. And America is the biggest ally of Romania right now and has major defense fortifications over there. So that's kind of what I discovered on my most recent trip. All surrounding the center of time, what is supposed to be time.
Right.
So this master he did a reading on me, and I can't say that it's accurate because I just don't know. He said I would be involved with politics in 2 years. He certainly had been involved with politics. He couldn't get rid of the politicians, and he finally did get rid of them. And I do not wish to be in politics at all. But he had said that because when I go over there,
smart man.
but when I go over there, I start getting on these very important political, vibes, like the people I meet and whatnot. It gets, I'm like rubbing elbows on a much higher echelon of society over there than I do here.
All right. What is there a time travel aspect to this interest in Romania? I mean, is there like something like a lost civilization type of deal or something like that?
Both. I mean, they have the richest archaeology in the world in Romania. It's just loaded with it, but they don't have time or expense to explore it, and the rest of the world ignores it. There is a whole syndrome called chronocentrism, which means that you're the center of the universe. Well, they invented that word for Romania to try and explain away Romania's, or Transylvania in particular, their initial phase in this civilization. It's the origin of civilization because it existed during the Ice Age because it's protected. That area is protected. And to the degree someone wants to argue it's not protected, it's loaded with caves. So you can go into the caves where it's 55 degrees and there's water and you can survive. So this is where civilization receded to during the Ice Age and then re-emerged from, and eventually came out, and the Emperor Trajan of the Romans, who invaded Romania, said he was going back home. He referred to it as his home. So yes, there's a whole hidden history to Romania, and it's explained in some of these books. But yes, it's also filled with gold. Now this is inarguable that the area that I'm talking about is loaded with gold underneath the ground. But and according to the book, it's pure gold. It's not gold ore, and this facilitates super consciousness. And if you go down these golden tunnels long enough, you'll get to a throne room where there's these golden thrones for beings about 6 or 7 feet high, more than 6 or 7 feet high. I think the thrones are that high.
Now, have you seen this yourself, Peter?
No. I've not seen this. This is according to the book, and I have heard of the professor, people who knew the professor who's mentioned in the book, who disappeared. He just disappeared, and he's the one who told about these things. Professor
he's probably down there guarding the gold. I know I would be.
Well, see, the thing is with the gold, the ancient nations would give gold to their enemies to destroy them. So if you go there, you don't dare take the gold. If you find a nugget, you don't take it. You're asking, just like these people that would take volcanic rock from Hawaii.
I was just going to say, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You don't, if you want to go into Mississippi or Alabama, maybe you can take the gold. I can't speak for those places. But if you go there and you find...
You mean they have gold in Mississippi?
I don't know. I'm just saying, if you find a golden... Somebody just found a big gold nugget in Australia with a metal detector. It was worth like almost $200,000. So, maybe it's okay for him to take that gold. But this area, if you're keeping in with the traditions, I mean, I wouldn't dare take it. Just because of all the things. I met my wife at this one of these sites over this gold area. So it's like these spirits have given me great gifts.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I have so like I'm following this, this protocol that is sort of laid out to me. And I kind of figure out the protocol, and it takes me years. And then on this sacred site that I was going to, it's known as Sarmasejatusa, where the religious capital of the Dacians, I met the woman who was to be my wife. I didn't know she was going to be my wife, but now she is, and she's been here a year and a half.
Well, wonderful.
Yeah, so that's the gold, all the gold you really need in life. But yeah, so
well, what a positive attitude.
Well, you have to have a positive attitude, and I would also mention that her spiritual mother, who helped raise her, was a student of Hermann Oberth, who you mentioned, who was the father of German rocket science.
Rocketry, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was from Transylvania, by the way, Hermann Oberth.
Is that right?
Yeah, a city called Sibiu. There's a German area of Transylvania, and yeah, so he and she studied with him in what was the equivalent of high school.
My goodness.
Not my wife, but her.
Yeah. Well, I remember now. Hermann Oberth had to be one of the first scientists or somebody with good academic credentials who actually, was interviewed and gave statements, and even wrote an article. I thought it was for Parade, the weekly Sunday supplement, but I think it was American Weekly or whatever it was called back in those days. He actually did an article on how the space program, I guess especially the German space program, had help from somewhere out there. Now, we know that the Germans, going back as early as 1918 or 1919, were holding seances. Is this not right, Peter?
Yes.
They were holding seances and purporting to get channeled information from a similar Nordic type race from some other galaxy.
Well, it gets a little. See, it's the Vril. This is the Vril.
Yeah, it's a Vril.
And they had the Vril Society, and the Vril Society was sponsored largely by Rudolf Hess, and Rudolf Hess was very knowledgeable about the mechanics of these craft. It's not really recognized that well. I wrote about it in my book Spandau Mystery, which is actually a novel, to try and explain some of these things. That is another, I guess what you'd say, Nazi type book that I wrote, the Spandau Mystery, a novel. But Hess was very much financing the Vril Society. under the direction of Karl Hausover. But this vril idea is this is what my friend Jan von Helsing first taught me, was vril is a Tibetan word. So there was this vril, Tibetan agenda. So when we get to the Nordics, it can, maybe some of that stuff's true, but it kind of throws us away from the Tibetan connection, and which gets very interesting. It gets a lot more interesting because it's a little more tangible. And of course, the Tibetans used the swastika. And of course, the Germans were just crazy about this place called Hyperborea, which I said is really, they were invading Romania for the oil fields, but they were ignoring the whole area of Transylvania, which was where all the real gold and esoteric stuff was. They were interested.
Well, now Hyperborea, which I don't really know too much about or anything about at all. Jim Penningston, the fellow there who had one of the experiences from Rendlesham Forest, with all this binary code of zeros and one and all, when they added it up and tried to figure it out, it led to Hyperborea, which they said was somewhere, or I guess it existed at one time in the Pacific. Is there a connection between that?
The Greek, it comes from the Greek, Hyperborea, which means above the north winds. And if you Greece, north of Greece is Bulgaria, which was Bulgaria was actually, the Temple of Orpheus is in Bulgaria. So that peninsula, that Balkan area, if you go north of Bulgaria is the Danube, and everything above there is Romania. So they were really referring to Romania when they said Hyperborea. And that's what the Greeks referred to it. That's where we get the word Hyperborea. And if you read Greek mythology, they say Apollo was a Hyperborean, and so was his sister Diana, the twins. So that's really what Hyperborea was referred to in literature, and the capital city was Thule. They're really talking about the inner earth. This is really about the inner earth. Now, the inner earth can be a lot of different things, and the Tibetans are very much tied to the inner earth as well. And they are an ancient cousin relationship with the mountains of Transylvania. There's a relationship between Tibet and Romania there in terms of they were both ancient places that survived the flood.
Well, now, Adam, do you see the history of the human race kind of in terms like this? I mean, do you think that there's secret societies and in different places where these strange things have been going on for centuries, perhaps without the knowledge of the rest of humanity?
Well, I'm always amazed with Peter's knowledge. And yes, to answer your question, Tim, but I'd like to ask Peter a couple questions.
Yeah, by all means, go for it.
Time we have
yes
left. Man, I have a bunch of questions, but
I sent you a message. You can have fun with that. But anyway.
Okay. One of the things we touched on earlier was this idea of the Mandela effect, and I'm wondering. They always talk about in time travel the paradox. If you go back in time, and you're gonna it'll basically be a ripple effect. You're going to screw something up, which will change our reality or our history here, in present time. And I often wonder, you hear these stories about the Mandela effects, or it looks like people have a memory of something, but now it's this. What happens? Is it possible that if time travelers are going back in time, they're constantly rearranging our reality? Might that be one?
Well, that's one scenario. But what I would tell you, based upon my limited knowledge, is that this stuff is very tightly controlled by what you would call jinn or guardians or gargoyles, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. These topics are very. So if you get to the point where you're like the kid with the cookie jar, you're putting your hand in the cookie jar. It's not like your mom, who's going to be pretty lax with the cookie jar. No, they don't want you to have any cookies. And so this is what happens.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. With the Montauk, wasn't that part of their plan, the group who developed that, was to go back and alter the past to change history?
Well, yes, and you got to realize the Montauk Project was discombobulated, according to the story, because they got too powerful, and so they got censored themselves. They were pushing the envelope, and this is inevitably what happens. If you get too powerful, something will come to neutralize you.
Okay.
Unless you are warranted to go there for whatever reason.
Yeah.
That's my answer to that.
So Hyperborea, yeah, and I've heard the legends connected to the inner Earth. There are those stories that Hitler relocated to Antarctica, and that there's these openings in the North Pole. Have you written about that at all? Do you think the Nazis had some type of outpost there, perhaps in the inner Earth?
There's no question they had an outpost in Antarctica. What my friends in Germany, I was over there in 2007, told me that it was relocated to the Mato Grosso in Brazil, Paraguay. I don't know that this is true. This is what they told me, because the place in Antarctica got untenable because of a bacteria that they couldn't control. Now, there's other people that could tell you that they're still in Antarctica, but the Mato Grosso is a very hot area. It was the area alluded to in the Boys from Brazil movie. But it's also, when I got back from that trip to Germany, I looked up Mato Grosso and I found out that George Bush's daughter, W. Bush, had just been down there to purchase a huge amount of land for the water rights. And the only bigger owner, and this is in Paraguay, the only bigger owner was Sun Myung Moon. So, in that area. So this tells you a lot about that area. And it also, they said they married up with Marconi's group, the Nazis from Antarctica. I don't know if it's true. It's certainly interesting stuff. And the Germans, by the way, if you talk to them, who are sort of in the know or claim to be know, and might have identifications with the past life people who were in the Vril Society, they take their past lives very seriously. It's not like in America, where people will be Cleopatra or Caesar. In German,
I hate to put the kibosh on this, but we gotta gather up our relics, you guys, and get ready to move out of here. And I do want to give you a minute apiece to tell us where people can find you on the internet, the next project that you might be working on, and what's big in your life tonight. Adam, you go first.
Yeah, pretty easy to find. AdamGorightly.com is a website. I have a website on Discordian history, and books on Amazon, if anybody's interested. I'm working on like a half dozen different things. One is the contactee book we've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking at having that done hopefully by the end of the year, and several other things. But
always busy, always a busy man. Gotta accumulate a few more years. But hey, with Peter is here, he'll help us do it. Peter, how about you? What's on your agenda?
You can read all about what I'm up to at timetraveleducationcenter.com. Timetraveleducationcenter.com. I've been doing a lot of videos. I'll be doing more videos. I'm working on 2 books, and it'll probably be a 3rd book. The 2 books are Stardust and Initiation into Time, and the other book is called L. Ron Hubbard, The Tao of Insanity. These are they're available as I'm writing them on my paid subscriber website. They will eventually come out in book form where anybody can buy them.
Well, you're still knocking away. These other publishers have come and gone, and we're sitting here talking about what we're going to be doing 6 months from now. And of course, you can always find us at kcorradio.com. All the shows are archived there, and Peter helps us put everything up on YouTube at Mr. UFO's Secret Files. Over 100 videos up there now. Tim, good night. Adam, good night. Peter, good night. And I'll see you in the future.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on exploring the bizarre, and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the bizarre.